The symphony starts off, as well as our season with the league has started off, we're in for a real treat this year, which I think we are anyway. Our membership drive is finished. We already had our Vintage to Visionary Style Show the third week of September down at the Julian. Very much fun and quite successful. We have wrapped up our Play for the Symphony back here at the Country Club. At the end of September, everyone who went had a very good time. And just this week, we had our arts trek for the third graders. We had 2,740 third graders from 54 schools. And I have to tell you, they were the most enthusiastic audience I've seen at a symphony performance. And if we can outdo them this weekend, I think there's a challenge for everyone. Right, Mark?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So without further ado, I'd like to bring William to the podium to tell us about the concert that we're going to be so enthusiastic about.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and welcome everybody. It's great to see you, and it's wonderful to begin a new concert season together. And it's been several months since we've been together at one of these Soundbites luncheons, and it's great to see a wonderful turnout to start the season off. I like to think of the concert this weekend as a sort of family reunion. We're bringing back old friends and family members, and some of us knew Manny from before Manny Laureano, our star trumpet soloist, so it's sort of a reunion for us, but for some of you it will be we'll making new friends with Manny Laureano. I want to welcome Manny Laureano, our trumpet soloist, and just wave and say hello. We'll talk to him in a little bit. And among the old friends, we have Michael Gilbertson, composer extraordinaire. Michael's here. We'll hear from him in a little bit. And Carolyn Curtis, our longtime beloved retired concertmaster. I want to take a moment to thank Cunningham and Butler for their generous support, full sponsorship, and guest artist sponsorship of these concerts this weekend. We're delighted to have John, Alice, and Debbie Butler here. Thank you so much. Yeah, the music for this program has a wide variety, and I'm excited about the variety in the program, too. The music spans 4 different centuries, the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and 2000s. That's quite an achievement right there. Yeah, the earliest piece in the program is the Concerto for Two Violins by Antonio Vivaldi from about the year 1711. And we're excited that this piece will feature Caroline, our retired concertmaster, and Eleanor, our current concertmaster, together. So that's going to be really special. Yeah, and then, of course, from the 1800s, we have Beethoven's incredible Fifth Symphony. Every time we hear this piece, one of the biggest challenges is for us to try to hear it fresh, to try to hear it as if it were the first time, to discover new amazing moments in the piece. And that's a challenge for the musicians as well as the audience. Yeah, also from the well, it's interesting, that piece is Beethoven started it in 1804, he took a break and wrote the Fourth Symphony, Fourth Piano Concerto, the Razumovsky String Quartets, and he finished it around 1808. At the other end of the 1800s, John Sibelius wrote Finlandia in 1898. And this incredible piece of music, this tone poem, was a sort of musical call for independence for the Finnish people. And it truly changed the destiny of the Finnish people and the whole political climate when it was first performed at that time. In the 1900s, we have a wonderful dance suite from the ballet The Three-Cornered Hat by Manuel de Falla, a Spanish composer. And this piece was premiered in the 19-teens, late teens actually, and just try to imagine the type of situation. It was beautiful Spanish music, sets and costumes in a Cubist style by Pablo Picasso, and incredible new choreography by Leonid Massin. So that was an incredible moment in sort of musical and dance history too. It was shortly after Stravinsky had broken new ground with the Firebird, Petrushka, and especially the Rite of Spring. And there are slight little echoes of Stravinsky and some of the French Impressionist composers in this piece by Defaya. And then for the 21st century, we have a brand new piece receiving its world premiere tomorrow night by Michael Gilbertson. And the piece is very fresh off the ink. The ink is still wet, so to speak. And what an incredible piece it is. We're so excited to be able to do the world premiere of a piece that I really think will be a very important new trumpet concerto in the repertoire to be played for years and years and years. So. We'll start the program with the orchestra itself, featuring the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra in the Dance Suite by Defaya. And as sort of bookends of the concert, we have the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra without added guests. And then there's another whole group of added guests that I'll talk about in a second. But I wanted to include a dance suite because all season long, we're building up toward our performance of Bernstein's wonderful West Side Story in April. And inspired by that, and that performance, by the way, being, of course, part of the Bernstein Centennial. Leonard Bernstein was born in 1918. Inspired by that, we have a number of programs that have dance suites in them. And in fact, there's a whole other program of Romeo and Juliet, inspired by our performance of West Side Story, which, of course, is a remake of Romeo and Juliet. So every program of the Classics series this season will have dance music, music that will dance. And I thought it would be a wonderful way to show what the orchestra could do in that style with the sort of flamenco-style dancing that you get with Defaya's three-cornered hat. Let me just play you a short example. It's a kind of a silly plot to this ballet. It's really quite funny, actually. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's basically a small town in Spain, and the city magistrate or sort of governor or mayor type person wears the three-cornered hat to show that he's in charge. But he's trying to flirt with the miller's wife, and she's a very, faithful married lady. But they poke a lot of fun at him at his expense, and a lot of things happen. But there's this wonderful dance, sort of a flamenco-style dance. Very exciting. Isn't that great? Yeah. If you're not as familiar with Defaya's music, I should mention that he had a wide range of styles. Like a lot of the composers who started their career in about the 19-teens or so, he went on and experimented with more modern styles later in his life. But one of the things he's really known for are the music that embraces his roots. And in a sense, you could call him like a nationalist composer, because he really did embrace the sort of native folk songs and idioms. And one of the things that actually got him really interested in theater, opera, and ballet were the zarzuelas, the sort of storytelling through music and acting that he did before working on ballets such as this. But this is a really exciting piece, and it's fun for the orchestra to sort of sink their teeth into something like that. Throughout the suite, it's just a short, like 9-10 minute suite taken from the ballet. Throughout the suite, you'll hear solos for the bassoon. The bassoon is oftentimes, in orchestral literature, the sort of buffoon of the orchestra. That's right, the bassoon is the buffoon oftentimes. And in a similar way, in Defaya's three-cornered hat, the bassoon represents the magistrate with the three-cornered hat, who is sort of a combination of a fool and a lech, let's say. So yeah, you'll hear those solos, and you'll know that that's him trying to sneak up to the miller's wife or plot something. So yeah, it's an exciting way to start a program too, because it begins with solo timpani, boom, 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 sort of a curtain riser that is very exciting. So after this piece, as another part of the sort of family reunion, we are bringing on the members of the Dubuque Symphony Youth Orchestra to play side by side with the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra in Sibelius's Finlandia. You know, we've done this a few times over the years, and it's always a great way to feature the very talented young musicians in the Youth Symphony and to highlight the program itself. The Youth Symphony Orchestra has been around for, I think, 48 years now. That's right. And it is that's sort of the highest level of our 3 youth training orchestras. There's also sort of a middle school age one and even an elementary school age one. And new this year, we have a new middle school aged wind ensemble that's just starting this season. So we have 4 youth ensembles. We're just featuring the Youth Symphony in the concerts this weekend, but it's a nice way to highlight all of these programs. All of the groups will be having a concert on November 19th at Five Lakes Theater at 5:30, and they traditionally have 3 concerts a year. So if you ever, want to see young music talent in action, I highly recommend attending their concerts. They are having a good time with this piece, I think. We had our first joint rehearsal together last night. I have to tell you that the biggest challenge is just fitting it all on stage. We love Five Flags. It's a charming old theater, and we're just so intimate with the audience and the orchestra right there. But the stage is not the biggest. So that's the big challenge in this case. For better or worse, we had a little snafu when we found out that senior high school had their homecoming this weekend, and so several of the members of the Youth Symphony could not participate, but most of them are trying to make it work so that they're doing both things. So yeah, they might be in their tuxedos for Sibelius Saturday night and quickly change to some other kind of outfit and go out to the Olive Garden or whatever they do before they go to the dance. Yeah, well, how fitting is it? Because this concert really is a homecoming with Michael and Caroline and so many others. And I do want to mention that Michael Gilbertson, of course, is an alumnus of our youth ensemble program, having played viola. Principal viola in that group. But let's not forget that he also won our concerto competition as a pianist at the same time. So lots of talent from Michael. But yeah, it's great that Michael is here at the same time that we're featuring the Youth Symphony, and I'd love to be able to get you in front of that group too, to talk to them and share some of your wisdom and inspiration. So yeah, the choice of Finlandia to do the side-by-side was intentional because I want the young musicians to know that playing in an orchestra can have this incredible sonic sound, but also playing in an orchestra we play music that can really change the world, and Finlandia is one of the greatest examples of that. As is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, really, truly. But with the Finlandia, as I said before, it caused a revolution. And the music itself has also been embraced in churches. It's that Be Still My Soul hymn that you recognize so much. My friends Tim and Mary were just telling me they were in Helsinki, and there's a park there where Finlandia is played like 24 hours a day. It's sort of the de facto national anthem of Finland now, but it's interesting that when it was written in 1898, it had a different name, Finland Awake, and it really was a way of telling the Finnish people that as a Grand Duchy of the Russian Empire, and with the sort of influence of the Tsar from Russia sort of tightening his grip, he was saying this is a chance for us to try to assert our independence. And it's a story that so much mirrors our own independence from England as the United States. So there was the Tsar of Russia in the case of the Finnish people tightening the grip. And even before they were a duchy of the Russian Empire, before that they were culturally and in many ways controlled by the Swedish people too. So the Finnish language was frowned upon, considered like a gutter language, and horrible. So this is part of a movement that was happening in the end of the 1800s that found Finnish, the people embracing their roots and revolutionizing and creating the Finnish country. So that's pretty cool. It's also just a really great piece to play for these young kids. It's loud. You get to play loud. That's important. But when you're playing in an orchestra, and let's say in your high school orchestra, it's great. It's a great experience. There's just some other kind of feeling when you're playing with a very large orchestra and you have the power of the sound and it overwhelms you. And it's experiences like that that for me and many of the members of the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra, and I'm sure folks like Manny Laureano, principal trumpet of the Minnesota Orchestra, it's moments like that where you're part of this huge sonic experience and you're part of something bigger than yourself. That's why we do what we do. That's what we love about the orchestra, the symphony orchestra. It can overwhelm you. And so that's what I'm hoping these young people experience this weekend, performing with the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra and performing for you. Well, I'm going to go a little bit out of order here and talk about the Vivaldi Concerto briefly and invite our wonderful retired concertmaster Caroline Curtis to join me up here for a little conversation. Please welcome Caroline Curtis. She's nervous about talking. Yeah. Well, I should have said you could have brought your violin. Oh, yeah. Welcome back. It's great to see you. And it's ever since you retired, you and I have been talking about bringing you back to solo. And this reason why we're doing it now is sort of bittersweet, you know. As some of you know, a dear friend of the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra and a dear friend of me personally, Caroline personally, Bob Byrne, passed away last November, I think it was. December. And Caroline is such a dear friend to Cindy and Bob, and it was one of their wishes to have you featured as soon as possible. So we're performing this concerto for two violins with Caroline and Eleanor in memory of Bob Byrne. So, yeah. And we thank you, Cindy, who's Cindy Byrne, right there. So, how did you come upon this particular concerto? Because this is the one that you had suggested.
Yeah, well, I know we had a little bit of a time restraint too, right? So,
right, yeah, that's true. Because the program was already set, and then we added this into it. And we didn't want to delay it too much because Bob has already, you know, it's been since December. So we put it on the first concert that we could, that hasn't performed yet. It's basically been performed. So, yeah, so there was a little bit of a time constraint. And Vivaldi, as another choice, probably was because he was one of Bob's favorites. So he loved listening to Vivaldi.
I thought it was Beethoven.
Well, that too.
Many.
Yeah.
No, I've always liked the Vivaldi because, first of all, people identify with the Baroque style, with the Four Seasons and all of his other great works. Even though it's an A minor, I mean, it's very exciting and brilliant and fun, and the themes are memorable, and to me, I loved it too because it was a shorter concerto that you could there are 3 movements, and it's only a length of 10 minutes, so to be able to get all that in 10 minutes is pretty profound, but each one is so individual, each movement.
It's true.
I think I love the first movement. It starts out with this kind of majestic-y, statement. And the second movement is so heartfelt.
Yeah, slow movement. It's a traditional fast, slow, fast design.
Yeah, and the last movement is really fun.
Yeah, the last movement has, even though it's fast again, it is very different than the first movement. It is maybe a little bit more playful. I don't know if the word is. But he wrote these concertos, so many of them, over 400. Many of the ones for violin were written for the school that he was teaching at in Venice, basically School for Orphaned Women. And so they were first performed by women in this school in the 1700s. And one of the great things about this particular concerto, like a lot of the ones he wrote for multiple instruments, you have 2 soloists. So what do you do with that? Well, sometimes they work together and they're really in sync with each other. And then sometimes one of them is in their own world while the other is doing something very different. And you see that especially in the third movement. Really, sometimes in this, for instance, in the second movement, sometimes just one is featured at a time, and then the other answers in response. And so he does that in different ways.
I agree with you. It's interesting. Sometimes Eleanor and I will be playing like in harmony of each other together. Sometimes it'll be like a question-answer kind of thing, and the orchestra is involved in that too. And then many times she'll have like a little melodic line, you know, soaring above, and I'm doing da 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 da, you know, like an accompaniment figure, which is kind of not complex. It's busy.
Yes.
But I think that's typical of his style.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much music he can get out of some sort of simple melodic material, and how much variety he can do with the two solo violins. Now, because it was written in the 1700s, at the time it would have been performed with harpsichord. And so we have a beautiful harpsichord joining us for this as well. That adds to that sound, that authenticity, and you know, there's something so special about the sound of the harpsichord with the ensemble. It not only just fills out the harmonies and the sound, but it sort of takes you to that era, I think, when you hear it. So it's absolutely gorgeous. I'm sorry that Eleanor couldn't join us for the luncheon today. She has another appointment. Actually, she's playing Concertmaster with the Joffrey Ballet, and she had a rehearsal today, and she's coming back for our 2 rehearsals later today, so she's got 3 rehearsals.
Only when you're young.
Yeah. So, speaking of that, so tell us, speaking about young ones, you have some new additions to your family. So
yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, since I've left the symphony, I'm still performing in the Chicago area, and I play with one of the top wedding bands in Chicago, so those aren't really rewarding musically, but pays the bills. Anyway, besides that, I've been really enjoying my daughter. Sabrina just had another grandbaby, so I have 2 now. She has 2 little girls, and one's just not even 2 yet. So, and Grammy's even thinking of starting her on that violin.
So there's an almost 2-year-old, and then basically almost newborn.
Yeah.
So you're busy with grandma duties.
Yeah.
That's so exciting.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
But can I take a second to
Please.
I want to say, first of all, thank you so much. I'm honored that you asked me to come back. I mean, it's a real privilege to play with the symphony, and it's great to see all the musicians again. And there's still quite a few that are here. There's some new ones, but it's great to see all the old faces too. I'm also enjoying so much playing with Eleanor. I hope you all embrace her as you did me. I'm sure you will. She's not only a fantastic violinist, but working with her, she's a very nice person, just very down to earth. And she has told me many times how much like she said, this is my favorite gig. Wow. Yeah, she loves the community just like I do, and she loves all of the people, and she loves working with you. So I think that's really cool. But mostly, I'm so happy to be able to play in honor and memory of Bob Byrne. That man, I mean, not only was he so versatile and extremely talented in all the professions that he accomplished in his life, but he was such a wonderful supporter of the symphony and the musicians. And of course, he's a dear friend, as is my very, very dear friend, Miss Cindy, who I always come back and stay with her. We have great fun in your town, exploring. And thank you so much to the Symphony Orchestra League for the lovely gift basket that I received. All the popcorn and the... Yeah, maybe I shouldn't thank you yet, though. Anyway, and again, I love this town. I've come back many times. Unfortunately, I don't always see all of you when I come back, but sometimes I do. And it's a great town, but most importantly, it's all of you, because you're so gracious and caring, and I feel so privileged to have been able to establish relationships and friendships since I've been here and coming back. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Caroline. We're so excited to feature you on these concerts.
I'm excited too.
Yeah, it's wonderful working with you
Thank
again.
you.
Thanks. Wow. Well, I'd like to invite Michael Gilbertson up next, and we can talk a little bit about his piece, and then after that we'll bring Manny Laureano up, the soloist in that piece. Please welcome Michael Gilbertson. So Michael, catch us up to what you've been up to lately. I know that it wasn't long ago that we had performed your Tragedy Tomorrow. And over the years, just for those of you who weren't aware, we've performed maybe 4 or 5 different pieces of yours?
I think we're up to 7 or 8.
7 or 8 now, yes. 7 or 8. We have
Some of them we want to forget though.
We have the honor of being the orchestra that's played the most Gilbertson music in the world, and probably commissioned the most and done the most premieres.
Absolutely, yes.
As well. That's no surprise, no coincidence. So we're very proud of our own and the fact that you're from here and you grew up here. We're delighted to support you. So tell us what you've been up to lately.
So I recently moved to San Francisco, where I am teaching at the San Francisco Conservatory and am composer in residence with the San Francisco Chamber Orchestra.
Wonderful.
So that was
That's
a
exciting.
long drive. But
So you had been living in New Haven, where you're still probably finishing up your doctorate,
correct, yeah.
and you literally drove all the way to San Francisco with your stuff?
Correct.
Wow.
What little I had left, yes.
And you were thinking about a trumpet concerto the whole way on the drive, right?
Well, most of it was drafted at that point, but
Oh, really?
I was thinking about engraving it, which is what actually takes the longest.
Well, why don't you speak to that a little bit? Tell them what your process is. You don't start on with the software then.
No, definitely not.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I sketch everything at the piano. I grew up as a pianist, so I'm kind of most comfortable there. I like a nice grand piano that I can close the lid and have all my papers out on top and just draft things there. So every piece has kind of a different process. For this piece, a concerto with a soloist, we wanted to get Manny the part as early as possible. We wanted to give him a good 3 months with the piece before the premiere, which when you hear the piece this weekend, you'll hear why we wanted to give him plenty of time with it. So the first thing I did was to draft just the trumpet part with kind of just a light idea of what the accompaniment was going to be. And then I moved to San Francisco, which was a long drive, took a while to get settled there. And then at that point I was able to orchestrate the piece. So at that point I actually didn't need a piano anymore, I was just writing right into my software.
Oh, okay. And that must be so time-consuming and detailed. I mean, to get everything just perfect in the parts and score. I mean, and musicians are notoriously easy to be upset if something is like wrong or doesn't look right on the score, or if it's out of range, or if it's uncomfortable to play. And they want to be challenged, but they don't want it to be impossible. And we're a very finicky, not finicky, but
No, finicky is a good word.
also like difficult. We're a difficult bunch to please.
That's it.
Yeah. So, yeah. But you did a brilliant job. This piece is fantastic. I got a text message from one of our players this morning that's saying, wow, what a fantastic piece this is. And that's pretty rare, to get unsolicited enthusiasm from one of our hardened, longtime orchestra musicians.
I want to know who that is later.
Okay, so there were many influences and inspirations behind this piece. First off, there was your work with the Minnesota Orchestra last season. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a year ago, this would have been January 2016, right? What year is
So a
this?
year and a half ago.
Yeah, a year and a half ago. The Minnesota Orchestra has a program every winter where they feature new works by young composers. And so I was programmed on this concert, and when I was there, they set up meetings with all of the principal players from the orchestra to go through your parts, make any changes that need to be made, things like that. And probably had 10 meetings or so. And every player, every principal, just complained and complained about all the things they didn't like in the piece, things that were really hard. The flute player was the worst. Yeah. But then I got to Manny. And
He's the principal trumpet.
Principal trumpet. Manny did not complain about anything. The things that were hard, he said, this is tough, but it's going to be a good challenge, and I'm looking forward to it. And he had a lot of good ideas. He I know, enjoys playing new works. He enjoys the challenge of that, and I remember he brought all of his auxiliary instruments along too. A few of those, the piccolo trumpet and a few other things, different mutes, and so he loves trying different colors and things like that. And I just thought, this is somebody I would love to work with. Those are exactly the kind of musicians I like. I like to have to my festival in the summer and work with as a composer too. And I remembered that William had been assistant up there.
Yep,
And we
well, sort of staff conductor,
Okay.
technically.
And yeah, we had been talking about doing a bigger work.
Yeah,
and
in,
so,
in fact, the time when I was there is when they started that program for
Right,
young
yeah.
composers with Aaron J. Kernes, David Evan Thomas, and people like that. Yeah. So I knew Manny well from my time there, not just with my work with the Minnesota Orchestra, but Manny was a real friend and mentor to me with the work that I did with another orchestra called the Metropolitan Symphony. He was the music director there, and he was extremely gracious, letting a young, schmuck like me, right out of grad school, conduct a concert of, wait till you hear it, Brahms 3rd, Intermission, Shostakovich 5th. So, I know, just of doing that kind of program, and he encouraged it, he let me do it. And then he stepped down, he retired from that orchestra, and I won the music directorship of that orchestra up in the Minneapolis area. So he's a dear friend, and then later we featured him. I worked together with him in the Aratunian Concerto. So Manny and I go back, but I hadn't seen him for over a decade, because I've been here in Dubuque, and I've been doing other things, and other work with other orchestras. And so when you told me about your work with him, I said, oh, I love Manny. And we knew that we wanted to commission a new piece for you. We knew that, but I didn't know at all that you were thinking possibly about a concerto. So tell us, continue the story, sorry.
well, from there, William mostly took it from there. We talked about doing concerto, and
But you
I
had
don't
these
really
great
remember.
ideas
Yeah.
with the Gabrielli,
oh yeah,
Gershwin.
the piece, yeah. Well, yeah, for writing the concerto itself, I just thought about all of the trumpet music that I really like, starting with the first really great brass composer, who was Gabrielli, who was active in Venice during the Renaissance, and he wrote just really exciting brass music, and he was in St. Mark's there. If you've ever been to St. Mark's in Venice, there are these balconies at each end of the cathedral, and he'd put one brass choir on one end and another brass choir on the other end, and you'd have this sort of antiphonal, before surround sound, this was as close as you could get to that. These very beautiful, rich, exciting pieces. And so the first movement of the piece, especially the opening, is inspired by that. So the work will begin with the orchestral trumpets out in the house, and they'll do a kind of antiphonal fanfares with Manny, who will be on stage. And then the next kind of trumpet music that I really like is jazz. I love Miles Davis. And so the second movement of the piece is much jazzier and very lyrical. Manny has just a wonderful lyrical sound, so I really wanted to feature that. You'll hear that a lot in the piece. And then the last movement of the piece is called a troika, which is a Russian dance. It's also like a Russian sleigh ride. Yeah.
Three horses.
3 horses. Yeah, exactly. So the dance is kind of like a gallop sort of thing, and troikas usually just fly by. And the last movement of concerti are notoriously just really fast, with lots of rushing notes that go by really fast. So I wanted to make sort of a little joke out of that. So the beginning of the movement starts really slowly, and then over the course of about a little less than a minute, the tempo goes triples. It just goes faster and faster until you get up to the tempo of the piece.
Yeah, and you actually have the little sleigh bells in there.
A few sleigh bells.
A few
in
sleigh
there,
bells
yeah.
had to be in there, just like Prokofiev's famous troika from Lieutenant Kiji. Yeah, it's a brilliant piece. What you've done with the trumpet part, and then also what you've done with the orchestra, there are the colorations, and it's just wonderful. It really features the orchestra in a very prominent way as well. And I'm so delighted that you included a part for the piccolo trumpet. I don't want to give that away, but there's this whole section for piccolo trumpet so Manny gets to do double duty here on 2 different kinds of trumpets. And just the sound of that really high piccolo trumpet also evokes a sort of early, more Bach, kind of feel. So I think it's brilliant. The piece is awesome. Anything else you want to share about the piece, or what you're working on next, or?
Well, next I'm working on a choral work for a really great choir in Philadelphia, and then I'm doing a concerto for orchestra for the end of the season for the San Francisco Chamber Orchestra.
Great! We can't wait to see the score for that one. we're so excited for all of your successes, and we're just, really kind of speechless about your talent. And you are the first of a lot of Dubuque born and raised composers that we've featured over the years, and there must be something in the water, is what I'm saying. There are a number of other ones who have come up as well, and we love featuring all of you, and I think it's a really important part of our mission as the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra is to promote.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that we have some really great music teachers in this city.
Yeah.
I mean, really great. And I know Manny was visiting the schools this week, and he could tell you a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
But I have great music teachers here, and that's a big part of it.
It is. Thank you so much, Mike. Yeah, and sometimes, when you hear Michael's music and you see him and you're like, wow, that came out of that pretty face. Well, just, you'll know what I mean when you hear it. When you hear some of the music, this is really like, wow, William was right. He's such a, oh.
You get to speak about William now?
No, he doesn't have the mic anymore, sorry. Well, I'm excited to introduce you to, as I've said, a longtime friend and mentor of mine, Manny Laureano, and it's a thrill and a really kind of like a dream come true for me to work with him again and invite him here to meet you, to work with the symphony, to be in the schools here in Dubuque. Please welcome Manny Laureano. So welcome.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm so full of praise and things I want to say to you, but we only have 20 minutes and it'll literally take me about an hour, just the impressions. I'm not kidding, because I've had a chance to do these school visits, and as I just said to the table where I'm sitting, I want you all to feel very good about the state of music education here in Dubuque. I have had the opportunity to visit 2 high schools, and then this morning, a middle school. And I was so incredibly pleased with what these kids are doing. They're very well prepared. The instructors are very motivated. They're ready to teach. I didn't get a chance to meet Mr. Dow because he was out ill, so I kind of took his class for him. But I want to say how incredibly happy I am to see that young people are being so well tended to. So in that regard, since they're taking care of business, I encourage you that when they have concerts and you've got a free night, go.
Yeah.
Go and support them, seriously. It means more than you actually might know for a young person to see more than just his parents out there in this, like, who are these people? They're here to see us? Wow. That's an important part of I think, the aspect of what music is supposed to be all about in terms of it being. I told the Mr. Dow's class that this is, you're engaged in the art of communication. This is a communication skill. This is like a language that you're learning, and you have to learn to speak music, which takes me to a couple of stories, one being about Finlandia. So since I play trumpet, we have this ridiculous thing that goes on once a year called the International Trumpet Guild Conference. So just picture that. Like the 750, 800 trumpet players all gathered in a hotel. God help you. And then all these people selling trumpets and gadgets and the latest thing to make you a genius and all that stuff. So I went there to play a concert and give a lecture. I'd done both those things, and I was upstairs just kind of poking around some of the exhibitors' rooms. So there was, I was in a place where somebody was selling some brand of trumpet, whatever. And then I see these 2 very burly guys, both with beards, right out of central casting, from Scandinavia, And they had on Finnish badges, and I could hear them speaking Finnish, and it's such a musical, poppy language. I love listening to it. And so I kind of watched them for, and so I grabbed one of the horns that was there, and I started putting a mouthpiece on, La, da, da, dee, la, da, da, da. And so the biggest, burliest guy stopped in his tracks, and he looked at me playing, and he went and he grabbed another horn, and we both finished the thing together. Isn't that fantastic? In London. And when we were done, he nearly killed me with this big crushing bear hug. I mean, really, he was going, I think he was happy. But, you know, I mean, that's always what you're talking about. I mean, this whole power of music thing. I teach the kids at the Youth Symphony back in Minnesota that music is a language. And you can either speak that language statically, or you can give inflection. You can have the sense that you actually know what it is you're saying. And so this is an incredible gift that you're giving the kids to get a chance to play next to the DSO members like this and be in the middle of that sound. I had a similar experience with the New York Philharmonic when I was in high school. I wound up sitting next to my future teacher at the time, Mr. William Vacchiano, and to sit in what seemed like this fantastic football field of musicians at Avery Fisher was just an enormous gift to me. So good for you for supporting the DSO in doing projects like this. Orchestras all over the country are doing more and more and more of this sort of thing because we realize now that we are no longer these little insulated bodies. That music, if it is, as we are just discussing, if it is a language, then the language is meant to be spoken to as many people as will understand. And if they don't understand, then make them understand. Make them understand by being as clear as you possibly can in this language that we're speaking. So good for the DSO for doing this this particular thing. Oh, and by the way, since I'm saying good for you, oh, thank you for that gift basket. Who's responsible for that? Excuse me. That was really good.
He was wearing a Dubuque, Iowa t-shirt at rehearsal last
Yes, I did. And while I'm thanking people, listen, thank you, Mark Waller, for all the help with this and for setting me up with Madeline, who's been carting me around, just being my handler, you know, all this thing. Xing Yi, who has attended to my needs. I had a very minor emergency situation, and she was willing to try and help me with that. Thank you, William, for asking me out there. Thank you, Mike, for writing a piece. And now I finally am connecting your face. This is, I have to tell you about this because what he actually said about me is true. When I probably tell you that, you know, I wrote this piece and this guy never emailed me, he never did anything, and that was by design. Because I recognize and I completely agree with what you're saying. We are such whiners when it comes to contemporary music because, you know, Mike, you don't play trumpet, right?
I did in elementary
In
school.
elementary school. Okay, so that's the point. He wrote like somebody who doesn't play the trumpet. No. And this is all to the good because I think some of the greatest pieces that were ever written were written by people who had the theory of a particular instrument, but weren't as forgiving. So I purposely didn't contact Mike very much about what's, except for just like a couple little issues.
Accidentals.
Yeah, things like that.
Sure about. Yeah,
And so because I wanted him to write what was in his heart, and this is why we had that, or didn't have that exchange when I was giving this little lecture to the composer and not complaining about what he'd written because I love a challenge. I love to be able to say, you know, for somebody to put something in front of me and just say, can you play it? And my answer is generally, you put it down on paper, you're going to get it. And that's, you know, listen, playing first trumpet anywhere is not about being shy and retiring. Right? I will tell you what a lot of first trumpets won't tell you. We are Top Gun. We're in charge of the squad. We bring it in at the end of the game. We're the ones that do the Hail Mary. So this
It is literally, it is the hot seat.
It
in
really
your
is.
orchestra.
And you know-
You have to be on, there's no room for errors and
No, you
forgiveness.
do not
Yeah.
bunt in the game
Yeah.
of trumpet. Okay, you gotta swing all the way.
And yet you've been principal trumpet of this world-class orchestra. Let's not gonna talk about how many years. We're not gonna talk about how long you've been there.
No, well, I'm held since 1981.
Wow.
Since 1981, yep, I am.
That is a long time to be in the hot seat.
It actually gets better because I was in Seattle for 4 years before that.
Wow.
So I've been in this
Okay.
business really man and boy. I just had my 62nd birthday and I'm glad I'm still able to do this.
It's incredible.
You know, in the old days, this was like when a lot of guys were packing it in and just saying, okay, it's time to let somebody know. I like this job. I'm
And you're premiering
as long as I can. Yes.
difficult new pieces.
Well, and this is the thing. This is the thing. When you have somebody who's as talented as Mike, who can write pieces like this and say, you gotta bring your A game, because there's no playing around in this piece. You gotta really be at top. This gave me a wonderful excuse to just make sure that my face was ready for action. That's why I was so happy about yesterday's rehearsal. I mean, I got all my little high notes and was able to enjoy the second movement. You're going to love the second movement. This thing, it is gorgeous. The outside movement is also very, very beautiful, but this middle movement is like listening to a song. You have to. If I have to adopt a different personality for each movement, then I would say that the first movement I'm kind of back in Venice playing this kind of a wonderful antiphonal Gabrielli stuff, and then for a while then I get to be kind of this more modern, trendy character from like uptown Minneapolis. That's sort of what the rest of that is like. The second movement I kind of get to be a little bit of Doc Severinsen. You know, even though like you're more into Miles, I'm here in Doc.
And you've worked with Doc how many
Exactly,
times?
and I've been a friend of Doc's for
Yeah.
35 years or
Yeah.
so. And then the last movement reminds me of a wonderful Russian trumpet player by the name of Timofey Dokshitzer. And all this kind of virtuosic playing. So that's what being, I think, a musician is. It's acting, isn't it? There's a lot of, you have to portray parts. And this program, you are nuts, man.
It is nuts. It's sort of
This is-
evolved on its own.
It's like if you come to this concert and you can't find something you like, you just ain't trying. I mean, really, it's a wonderfully eclectic.
It is
It's
eclectic,
the kind of thing that musicians sort of live for, is to just sort of be able to play different personae on every kind of piece. It is a lot of fun for us to do, so I'm sort of jealous that you have a first trumpet player already playing the fun. By the way, okay, so now this is when I get to embarrass one. First of all, I'll tell you
the
very.
skeletons are buried.
I'll tell you a very sweet story, actually. And he was. Thank you. Hello, Washington. When I did give up the Metropolitan Symphony, William was in the audience for that last concert. We had just finished doing Mahler Fifth Symphony. And so everybody knew that it was my last show and all this stuff. And so at the end, and I hope you remember this, at the end, I saw where William was, and in the applause, I motioned for him to come up. And I took my baton and I handed it to him. And through tears and a breaking voice, I said, "Take care of these guys." Do you remember that? Yeah. And he really did. He brought the orchestra up even further, so that made me extremely happy. Now, the other story, well, you're not gonna like this. You know, so William was, like he said, he was a staff conductor, and he had to cover it. It is the most thankless job. It is the most thankless job you can make, because you sit there, and it's the understudy. Okay, basically, you have to learn all the stuff, you have to be at all the rehearsals, you have to see what the conductors, all the changes going on.
But you can sit out in the audience and you watch the main conductors do it. You're just there if they get sick. And you try to think, how can I get them sick?
He's the only other conductor besides myself that will admit that. So finally, I mean, he was kind of the kid at the time because he was just so much younger, very young then. And so, was it Ado or Ado? Ado.
Ado DeBart was the music director.
Yes. And so,
We were
Ado
on
was
tour.
late. Yes.
In Long
we were on
Island.
tour. Yes.
Right before Carnegie Hall.
Yes.
Yeah. I was with them on tour.
And we were waiting, and Ado, where's Ado? Where's Ado? So finally, the kid gets up on stage, and finally he's going to get to do something with us. He raises his arms, and here comes Ado. And we all go, oh, really?
It was a heartbreaking moment. You were the one who was encouraging me the most. You were like, you had your trumpet and we were like, go, go, go. It was the master singer. It didn't happen right away because Andre Watts was on stage and they were first supposed to run through Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto with Ado. So he was on stage, the orchestra was tuned and ready, no conductor. The administration of the orchestra said that they didn't want to subject Andre Watts to their young apprentice conductor, so they asked Andre to step aside and let me start the Meistersinger prelude, which was also in the program. So everybody's having to get their music out, and that was what took so long.
Yes.
And Manny was so sweet. He was like, go, go, go. And I'm just about ready to conduct it.
Yes.
And Ado comes out and he says, what are you doing there?
That's exactly it. So just understand
The
that
Dutch accent,
all
sorry.
that was actually pretty good, I thought. Just understand that there really is a process to all the stuff that you see that happens on stage, whether it's somebody driving in their car going, breaking every speed law, trying to get from one place to another, whether it's a young conductor sitting there paying his dues, whether it's a young boy in the middle of East Harlem in New York playing his horn out the window to try and see, well, okay, is this ready yet?
So that's where you grew up, East
I
Harlem?
grew up in East Harlem in New York. What, you couldn't tell from my accent?
I thought I wasn't sure. How appropriate that we're doing West Side Story.
Well, yes. Oh, look, just more reasons for me to be jealous. But really, this is so much fun. Yesterday we had the first rehearsal for this show. And I didn't know what to expect. Again, by design, I wanted a certain amount of surprise. I mean, I knew William was going to have everybody prepared and all that stuff. There was really nothing to worry about. So, the first time I heard that concerto was yesterday evening in its fullest. And now, probably today, we'll make just a couple of more little adjustments and things just to make it like a really, really wonderful experience. But I can hardly wait to play this for you because I really think you're going to just enjoy the heck out of it.
Well, thank you, man. You're fantastic. I can't think of anybody else who has consistently played at the highest world-class level, like you, and then also consistently for decades and decades been a dedicated music educator. We have to talk about MYS. Tell them about Minnesota, and tell them about Eleanor, too.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. There's that too.
Yeah,
Okay.
so in addition to being principal trumpet of the Minnesota Orchestra, which is a very full-time job and very challenging, and he's done it brilliantly for all these decades, tell them what else you've been doing. Besides conducting these community orchestras like the Metropolitan Symphony, which he passed off to me, and now the Bloomington Symphony in Bloomington, Minnesota, and others. He conducts these other groups too, but go on.
But now, for the last 30 years, my wife and I have been the co-directors.
And founders.
Well, no, not founders. Founders was 45 years ago.
Oh, I thought
So, yeah, well, it just seems that way because we've been there so long. So, 30 years ago, we were asked to be the music directors of the Minnesota Youth Symphonies. And they were at a real juncture. They had lost huge numbers. When I say huge numbers, I mean when I first became acquainted with MYS, which we call it, there were about 300 students in it, and Clint Barris was the music director, our principal viola in the Minnesota Orchestra. And then they asked me to come on. 300 members had dwindled down to, you ready? 65. Yes. You gotta work hard to ruin an organization. So we had a challenge and a half, and we had to work very hard. And by the end of the first season, we had 120 kids. By the end of the second season, we had 200. And so it's been on and on like that. And we've just been working to become one of the best educating musical bodies that we can be. And we finally had our first international tour this last June. I took the kids to Cuba. And so imagine, and it was at one point where I said to them, you know, just pause for a second and consider. We are playing the music of a Minnesota composer about themes from Cuba. Our next piece is going to be an American piece of music played by a Cuban soloist who now lives in Minnesota. In the intermission, we're going to play this Tsarist music of the Rachmaninoff Second Symphony, play as an encore the Stalinist Shostakovich 10th Symphony Scherzo, and finish up with a piece that is based on Puerto Rican stylings, played by an American orchestra in the middle of Havana. How great is our life? How wonderfully varied are your lives as musicians? And the kids really took that to heart. And that's why I was so excited about this program that you're doing, because it is so incredibly varied. It's a program like this is basically analogous to America. You hear somebody from Maine speak, then somebody from the Bronx, then somebody from Alabama, then somebody from Texas, then somebody from California, then the upper northwest, and then Minnesota, and all those different accents, all those different ways of thinking about things in this fantastically wonderful experiment called America. And so here's the kid now from East Harlem playing with his dear friend and playing music from based on a variety of styles. You know, here in wonderful Dubuque, Iowa. How lucky are we? Honestly.
And then we had a surprise for Manny at the rehearsal last night. I think it was a surprise that our concertmaster Eleanor Bartsch, you didn't know that she was.
No,
she
no.
is an alumna from the Minnesota Youth Symphony.
One of my former concertmasters is your concertmaster. Yes.
All full circle here.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
we're so delighted to have you here in Dubuque. Just
I'm thrilled.
your energy and your enthusiasm. You're so generous with young musicians, and I felt that. Michael felt that. Eleanor felt that. Literally thousands of kids who have gone through the Minnesota Youth Symphony feel that. And you're in this position in the trumpet world where you're a legend, and you could be, you could have your nose up high and snooting at young musicians or something like that, but you don't. And I think it's one of the great testaments to, I don't know how you do it, but
my
thank
mother
you.
would slap me silly. Took on airs. So that's the answer to that question.
Thank you to your mother.
Good to see you, buddy.
Well, in the last few minutes, do you guys have any questions for Manny?
Sure. Yes.
But for a person that dabbled in trumpet, I appreciate you have to have really good chops. And over the years, you obviously have that. Could you tell us about mouthpieces that you use for piccolo versus the other?
Well, that's kind of a technical question, but basically, what I need you to understand, he asked about the different equipment that we use, and since I am going to be playing the piccolo trumpet, the little tiny trumpet, and the larger C trumpet, what sort of things I have to do. Yes, in fact, the mouthpiece that I'm using for the piccolo trumpet is a mouthpiece that actually belonged to Doc Severinsen at one point. Oh boy, I can really drop names, can't I? And it fits this little horn very nice. And this horn I just came across. It's a very old instrument from the 1950s, and apparently may have belonged to my teacher. Yeah. So I mean, music is just so crazy. It's such a small world like that. But yeah, I do have to make a little. You do have to think a little differently than I do when I play on the larger horns. I think more orchestrally when I play on the larger horns.
Yeah. Now, I will also try to answer that question, but because Manny, when he plays on his regular full-size C trumpet, he has always had this special kind that has a sort of built-in mouthpiece.
Oh, that's right, yes.
So you could tell him about that. I mean, this is sort of a trademark for you.
Well, this particular horn is based on the same sort of idea of that integral mouthpiece and thing. It is a separate mouthpiece, but it looks like it's all one piece. Do y'all know Wynton Marsalis?
Yeah.
Okay, so Wynton and I have our horns made by the same gentleman, a fellow named David Monette, who is out of Portland. And David's been making my horns since 1984, and I absolutely adore the sounds. The sounds for me is like a nice thick chocolate. You know, I mean, it really sits very pretty on your ears. So Wynton and I love playing those instruments.
That's great. Frank.
Is it Dorothy before your time?
Yes, Dorothy is before my time. Yes.
No, Skorochevsky, you were there for Skorochevsky. He's asking about the former conductors of the Minnesota Orchestra.
Right.
Anton Dorati was before Manny's time.
Right, and Maestro Skorochevsky, I don't know how many of you know, he passed away fairly recently, and we played a concert in tribute to him, and he was quite a character, because someone once described his hand conducting as a butterfly floating, looking for a place to land. and that's really true. And somewhere in there was all the stuff that you needed. So we were able to kind of figure out what it was that he wanted. Very, very musical guy, very rhythmic guy. He felt every small 16th, 8th, in the music. It was really very special. I came in with Sir Neville Mariner, who also died last year. And Neville, I mean, he's English. What can you say? He's just a character, had a great accent, was a genius when it came to recording things. Followed by Ado, who's there when you came in.
I remember when Mariner came back to guest conduct, and I was apprentice with the orchestra then, and he was really funny, actually.
Yes, very funny guy.
He would come around and explain to the audience that when we have the violins on either side, the biggest problem is that the second violins have to polish the other shoe. I gotta say this in a concert. It's just charming. He would conduct without shoes, actually. I thought he was in socks.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hilarious. There was great. I remember when Skorochevsky came back and he did Bruckner 9, and that was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I knew I was a veteran with the orchestra when I wound up. The Maestro Skorochevsky would only come once a year, and so I knew that I was a real veteran with the orchestra when he came back and we actually repeated the piece. It was the Bruckner Third Symphony, which is the first thing I played with him as a member of the Minnesota Orchestra, and about 30 years later, there it is on my music stand going, holy smokes. I've been here for a while, I guess, and the guest conductors started repeating. Yeah.
Just another quick aside, the Minnesota Orchestra reunion here, or Minnesota reunion, continues with Mark Wallard, our executive director, because he worked for the Minnesota Orchestra at the same time I was there and knew Manny from before too.
I
So
ran the front of house.
Mark ran the front of
Gotcha.
house, if you
Gotcha.
remember, in the 90s.
Goodness.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, Manny, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait for them to hear you play.
Wonderful.
I I want to thank the Symphony Orchestra League for hosting these. They're wonderful work they do all year long. Let's give it up for the Symphony Orchestra League. Thank you. So, look forward to seeing you this weekend. Enjoy the concert and tell your friends. Let's have a good full house. Thank you.